feel like we're very close. Hi and welcome to a new video. Today I thought that we could talk a little about the books I read in January. And I'm so sorry if you hear the fan in the background. It's just honestly too hot to turn it off, even though it makes a lot of noise. So we're gonna have it on in the background, and I'm so sorry for that. And if you see my clock burn, it's on charge right now because I'm going away tonight. Ignore that because it has to charge, and this is just very humbling. But to actually get to the point, I read 9 books in January, which is a lot more than I've read for a while. I think I read like 15 books in total in both November and December, which means that I finally have started to get into reading again, which I really enjoy. And it's been quite a while since I read this many books in a month. I've read a lot of sci-fi, which is quite unusual for me. It's not that I don't like the genre, I never really reach for it, but I got recommended one book, which we're gonna talk about in a second, and then I kept reading because I really liked it. So the first book I read in January, which took me quite a long time to read, was The 3-Body Problem. I'm not going to try to pronounce the author's name because I am going to butcher it in case I do. And honestly, I think I'm not going to talk about this book too much because I still don't really get it. Like, it was good. I don't know what to rate it though, because the best way to describe this book is in 3 parts. We have the Chinese Cultural Revolution, where the book starts. We get to follow this young girl who sees her father get executed for being a scientist in the Chinese Cultural Revolution. I think it's in the 1960s. Don't quote me on that. And then the next part is 40 years later, so in the beginning of the 2000s, and then a lot of scientists are randomly starting to commit suicide, and no one really knows why. Like, there's a link, but they don't know what the link is. So the main character gets called into a meeting, and they're like, help us figure this out. And then the third part is a computer game. This makes zero sense. I know that, and as I said, I still don't really get this book. But there's this computer game where they're trying to solve the 3-body problem. And all of this are interlinked, interconnected in a way that it's basically humanity's first contact with aliens. This makes zero sense. I get that, and it's the best way to explain the book because it's so complicated. It had a lot of science in it, and it was very ambiguous and very hard to understand. Honestly, I think that maybe I should have done a bit more research before going into it. And it's a trilogy, and I have the other books and I haven't read them yet, and maybe it will make more sense when I've read those, but I haven't yet, which means that I don't know. And the trilogy is based around a theory that is called the dark forest theory, and I have an idea what it's about because I had a friend of mine try to explain it to me, and I honestly don't really remember. So I think that before I move on to the next books, I have to do some more research about that theory, and also the books in general, so that I could grasp the books a bit more, I think. And that's all I'm gonna say about that book because I don't get it. The next book is Project Hail Mary, and this is another sci-fi book, but a bit easier of a sci-fi, and it's also turning into a movie with Ryan Gosling, which I'm very excited about. And this is basically that we have an astronaut that suddenly wakes up in a spaceship and has no memory of why he's there. He doesn't really know who he is, what he worked with, what's his name, nothing. And slowly he starts to realize that he's on a spaceship to save Earth. and this is like extinction level threat, and he's the only one who's in the spaceship. So it's very much science, very much problem solving, but it's also the first unexpected contact with aliens, and I loved that part. I really do. That friendship was, for me, like the best part of the book, and I really enjoyed it. The science wasn't too complicated. Like, yes, it was complicated, and some parts probably I didn't understand, but it wasn't complicated in a way where the reader were kind of expected to know things beforehand. I felt like the author, I felt like he really tried to like explain the science in a way that it felt understandable. It didn't feel too complex, even though it probably was very complex. It felt understandable, which made my reading experience a lot easier and a lot better. So the next book I read was The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli, and this is basically a manual for how you can gain, maintain, and lose power as a leader. And this is a very controversial book because the context is that to be a good leader, you don't necessarily have to be a good person. That there's a difference between, in his words, being a good Christian versus being a good leader. That as a leader and have effective leadership, you may require manipulation and moral flexibility. That as a leader, you're allowed to do things that are morally wrong to gain power. And that is why we have Machiavellism and calling people Machiavellian, because that is basically saying that this is a person who uses moral flexibility to gain power. And I found it very interesting. I don't agree with it. I absolutely don't, but it's very interesting to read about it and like fully understand that word and why we still use it today, even though the book was written in like 1500s-ish, somewhere there. And yeah, very interesting, and I would absolutely recommend it to anyone who's interested in politics or just interested to why we use that word to describe people today, even though it was so long ago. And it got me thinking a lot about why we're still reading this book even though it's so old, and why we still use that word. Yeah. After that, I read one of the books I finally have physically. I had the other three as well, but I sent it home with my mom when she was here, so I don't gather too many books. I have so many books, but so I could send home some books. But the next book was Watermoon by Samantha Soto Yambo. Butchered that name 100%. But this is like a combination between fiction and sci-fi. This is, to explain it the best way, a magical pawn shop that appears only at night, and the story follows this young woman who inherits this pawn shop from her father and becomes really entangled in her history and strange bargains and hidden doors, and suddenly this man appears in her shop, and it has been not necessarily robbed, but the entire thing is in shambles and she don't know why. And in this pawn shop, it's not usual things. It's people come in there to trade their deepest regrets, and then they become birds that she collects and then give away to a certain kind of people. And when the pawn shop was robbed, a lot of these regrets disappeared and she needed to find them, and then this man helped her try to find it. I had such high hopes for this book. It had so much potential, and I really thought in the beginning that this would be a 5-star. I got a bit disappointed because I think I was more invested and interested in the actual plot rather than the romance, and I felt that they made some decisions that I was like, but why did he do that? Like, if it's more based on the romance rather than the actual story, which I was invested in and why I picked the book up, I didn't understand really the choices they made, and that just lessened my experience quite a lot and made me choose the rating I actually did. I think I gave it 3 stars. You see it up here. After that, I read another Harry Potter book. As I said in my last wrap up, I always have a book in my headphones when I fall asleep, and it's often a book I've read a lot of times just because if I accidentally fall asleep, I can still get a gist of where I am in the book and try to like revert it back to where I fell asleep, but also like if I can't really find the place, it's fine because I know the book. And I've tried to like fall asleep with or like listen to the audiobook of the book I'm currently reading, but then I fall asleep and then I get irritated by myself because I can't find exactly where I like left off, and then it just becomes a struggle. So I read Harry Potter and the Order of Phoenix, which is quite a long book. It's the longest one in the Harry Potter series, and I don't know if I think that either Order of Phoenix or Goblet of Fire is my favorite book-wise. The movie is 100% The Prisoner of Azkaban, no questions there. But I really enjoy it, and I just always love me a Harry Potter book. The next book I read was unfortunately also a disappointment, or not necessarily a disappointment, but it was I Look For You Everywhere by Cameron Capello. All of these names. And when I picked up this book, based on the blurb, I thought that it would be a fun, fluffy romance set in Italy. Because we have Magdalene and we have Theo. And Magdalene is currently studying in Oxford and Theo has studied in the States. And then they both come back to Italy and they haven't been there. Magdalene haven't been there for a year and Theo haven't been there for 7 years. And it's a lot of complicated family dynamics, and just relationships overall are very complicated in this book. And I wouldn't describe it as a romance. I would describe it more as a fiction where you follow family dynamics and a lot of damaged characters, and not necessarily morally good characters either. There's a lot of emotions and a lot of stuff happening, and they're supposed to be very flawed, but I think that I would have enjoyed it so much more if I would have went in with expectations of it being more of a fiction rather than a romance. But when I started reading this with the expectations of it being a fluffy romance, and it was the total opposite, I guess it just also fell a bit flat. But I can kind of, but also not, compare it to Magnolia Parks. Not necessarily like the actual content, but the way the characters are and the way the book itself is constructed. I would compare it more towards that style and that genre rather than a romance. So I think it's a good book if you go in with the right expectations, but if you go in with the wrong expectations, I just think that it doesn't measure up because you're looking for something that this book isn't it. Then I read another sci-fi, and this was Red Rising. I had a friend of mine recommend this to me a lot. He was like, you have to read it, you have to read it. And after a while I finally picked it up, and it was not that I didn't want to read it. I've actually had it like on my TBR for quite a while. I just haven't gotten to it yet. But what is this book about, you may ask? And this is a sci-fi dystopian society, I would say. Not necessarily dystopian, but kind of. It's more sci-fi. And the society is built upon colors. We have red, which is the lowest color, and then we have a lot of colors in between that, and then we have gold. That is like the elite society. And our main character is Darrow, a red. And his wife is also a red, and he's like, he works in mining and all of that, and then a lot of stuff happens which leads him to become a gold. He goes through a lot of surgeries and a lot of things to even be able to become a red. And then he goes into the academy, which is basically the school for all of the gold children. And it's a lot of death. It's a lot of like Hunger Games-esque. I wouldn't compare it to Hunger Games, but it's a game where they have to fight for survival. They're not supposed to kill each other, but you know, sometimes you just accidentally kill people. I feel like I'm explaining this so badly, but just read it. I gave it 4.5 stars, but I'm obsessed with the series, and especially Golden Sun. It's so good. I don't think it will be a 5-star, but I just really enjoy the characters. I really enjoy the plot, and it's so many like political aspects, and how the entire society is built, and like, can you change a gold to believe that reds are worth just as much as gold, and how all of them have been kind of conditioned to believe that if you're a certain color, you're supposed to be there. Like, democracy is a bad thing, and it leads to revolutions, and it's just bad. And can you change that thought into someone who's so deeply integrated into a society where it's told that you are a color, you're supposed to be that color, you're not supposed to question it? Now we have 2 books left, and the next one I listened to and read on my Kobo, and it's a non-fiction which is The Let Them Theory. I've heard a lot about this book, and I got recommended it by my teacher in Brisbane, and she, like, I don't know if she really recommended. She was like, oh, I read this, because I asked for recommendations, and she was like, let me think. And she said that she had read this, and I'm like, I've been thinking about reading it, if I should or not. And it's a self-help book, like, centered on the idea of releasing the control you let other people have of you, like other people's actions and choices, and instead focusing on your own choices and your own boundaries, and not letting other people affect you, and a lot of like emotional freedom and self-directed growth. And it's not necessarily any new ideas, it's a lot like, just let them. And I found some parts really, really good, and then other parts I didn't find as helpful. I'm like, but is this realistic? Like, yes, in some places, like if someone's coughing on a train or anything similar, like, yeah, then maybe it could help you. But it's also like, the part I found hardest to actually feel like was believable was with your family or friends, that with boundaries especially, because there's such a fine line between setting your boundaries and actually hurting people. And sometimes I just felt like she didn't necessarily take that into consideration, or maybe she did and I just didn't understand it. But sometimes you have to sacrifice your own feelings for other people, and I'm not saying that you should sacrifice it every time, or like let you sacrifice so much as you lose yourself. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that sometimes you have to be uncomfortable to let other people be uncomfortable. Like, let's say you're doing a group project, you can't always have what you want, and that's kind of what I felt like she was saying. And maybe I just wasn't the person for that. I don't know. I've always been a people pleaser, or not as much lately, but especially like growing up, I've always tried to like make sure everyone is feeling okay, that everyone is comfortable. And maybe that just goes against everything I've been brought up with, like what my parents have told me, what teachers have told me. And I just, half of it really good, could absolutely implement in my life, and the other half, I don't know. So I would say read it. Maybe you could take more from it than I could, but I mean, I don't regret reading it, but it didn't give me as much as I maybe thought it would. And then to the last book, and this is quite a different book compared to every other book, and it's Half His Age by Jeanette McCurdy, the actor who plays Sam in Sam and Cat and iCarly and all of that. I read her memoir, I'm Glad My Mom Died, and really, really liked it. I really liked her way of writing and just the book itself. So I was so excited for this book to come out, and this is a very disturbing novel. Like, this is fiction, and it follows a teenage girl who gets drawn into, or like, it feels incorrect to say drawn into, because she's very much aware, and like kind of her point is to get into a relationship with her teacher, an older man, her English teacher, which is double her age, therefore half her age, half his age, not her age. and it's very much examining like grooming, power imbalance, manipulation through the lens of a teenage girl. She's 17. It was very uncomfortable to read. It was very hard to read because like the main character isn't necessarily naive. She's not a perfect person and she's very like disturbing herself, but that also like she's being groomed, and it's so easy to see it from her perspective, and it gives you so many feelings. And I think that it's a really, really good book, and it's supposed to make you uncomfortable. Like, I felt so uncomfortable reading a lot of the parts, and Denna is so blunt in the way she writes, and it's so interesting, and it's so vulnerable as well, because in the end it's a very raw ending and a totally realistic ending in my opinion. Like, I don't know how to describe it without giving anything away, but it's just so human, and it's so important to go through this. And I think I read this in such a perfect time, and yeah, I don't know, it feels so weird to say I enjoyed it because I didn't enjoy reading it. It's such a hard book, and it's a really disturbing novel, but it's so important, and I think that Denna McCurdy wrote it in such a powerful and such a real way. So I would totally recommend people reading this. Just check trigger warnings. If you're under 18, maybe don't read it. It's very blunt and very, very explicit as well. But yeah, very much about authority, about grooming, about power imbalance. So that's all of the books I read in January. I'm hoping that February will be as good of a reading month, but I'm also traveling a lot. I'm traveling to Cairns in 2 days, and I'm so excited about it. I'm meeting a friend that I haven't met in a really long time. I think it was October. So really excited about that. But thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope it wasn't too scattered. I feel like my mind is all over the place, and the books as well. Like, I feel like they're so complex to explain. But thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.